Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek Interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geeks to Speak. You can learn about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Jossie Haines, and she started out in chemistry, but she transitioned to product engineering in the tech industry. And that's quite the shift. So I'm really interested in learning more about her motivation to making that switch. I'm also interested to learn more about her public speaking exploits and how public speaking has benefited her. Welcome to Teach the Geek Interviews, Jossie.
Thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you as well. So I mentioned that you started off in chemistry. So you got an undergraduate degree in chemistry. What was the motivation for that degree?
Yes. So, when I was getting my undergrad degree, and this was, in 1995, getting into software industry wasn't a big thing, wasn't as big a deal back then. And my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. And so even though I had spent a lot of time growing up with computers, I got my first computer when I was 5. I got a Commodore 64. When I went to college, I was like, okay, I'll get a chemistry degree and be a doctor. Around my junior year, I realized I had no interest in going to grad school and going through another at least 4 years of medical school plus residency. And I was like, well, I better figure out what I'm going to do now. And I'd always had a passion for technology. And so when I graduated, I got a job actually with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a technical consultant. And the first thing that they did was send us to a 3-month boot camp in Tampa. And they taught us how to code. And I'd taken a coding class when I was in college. But the person who was teaching it was actually a graduate, was usually used to teaching graduate students and wasn't used to teaching freshmen. So nobody did well in the class. The average was actually like a 19 out of 120. So when I took that class, I was like, I have no idea. I'm never going to learn how to code, right? So then when I took this boot camp, I was like, oh, I can pick this up. It's just about like the way it was being taught to me. And I picked it up really quickly, and they sent me to a training out here in California for a week on a technology that doesn't exist anymore now called Broad Vision. And I pretty much fell in love with the Bay Area. I fell in love with the culture, the climate. This was 1999, so we're talking about the middle of the dot-com boom. And I just fell in love with the ability to work somewhere where I could potentially impact the future. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can get a job out here. And in 2000, I applied to a couple startups, and in January found a job as a web developer at a small, very much non-existent Silicon Valley .com startup, and started my tech career.
I also noticed from the research I did on you that you ended up getting a master's in computer science. Did you do that before or after you started working at the startup companies?
So that was after. And so that is something that, I talked to a lot of people about the fact that I actually went back and got my master's degree. And so I actually worked for about 5 years before I went and did my master's degree. And I really encourage anybody actually who's thinking about getting a master's in computer science to work in the industry a little bit first, because I actually found it much more valuable to have some industry experience and know the types of technology I was really interested in exploring when I went and got my master's degree. And I thought having the foundation in the industry made getting that degree much more valuable. Now, the reason I went back and got my degree is after about 5 years of working in tech, I got really tired of people asking me why my undergrad degree was in chemistry and I didn't have a computer science degree. And so, again, this was 2005. And one of the things that I also tell people is, back then there wasn't nearly as much like online learning and things like that. So if I were to do this again, I'm not sure I would have gone back and gotten the master's degree because there's just so many other learning options. But back then it was a great way to kind of just up level some of the skills that I wanted to get deeper in.
So before and after the master's in computer science, did the work that you do change, or was it essentially the same?
So it pretty much was the same. It was just building on it. So my first couple years in the tech industry, I started as a web developer and ended up working at Sun on the Java download infrastructure. And so I was actually taking some classes while at Sun, but then they stopped doing their tuition reimbursement and I decided, hey, let me just go back to school and finish my degree full time. And I was actually working at NetApp part time while I was doing that. And then when I finished my degree, I actually stayed at NetApp and ended up working full time there for a few years until I ended up leaving NetApp with a bunch of other friends of mine and went to Zynga.
Oh, okay, interesting. So, so when it comes to, I'm really curious about even going from chemistry to computer science. Just I guess the I've spoken to someone else on my podcast who did, I think she actually did chemistry as well as her undergrad, and then she ended up going and getting a bachelor's in civil engineering. So that was a big jump too. I mean, I'm sure the requirement, the prerequisites to get into the program were much different for chemistry than they were for civil engineering. Did you have that issue of going making that
Yes.
big change?
Yeah, so one of the things that I ended up doing was, as I mentioned before, I went back full time to get my master's. I was taking classes while I was working at Sun. And one of the things I did was I did have to take a number of the prerequisite undergrad classes so I could get into the master's program. I didn't have to do all of them, but just basically like the core ones, like algorithms and operating systems, things like that.
Okay, gotcha. And so now you have this master's in computer science. So I have a friend, and he has a podcast called Snack Walls, and
Mhm.
he speaks to people about, well, a number of things. But one of the questions that he asks is about the, I guess, some tech companies, at least the bigger ones, are starting to remove the need to have a degree in computer science to work at their companies. Do you find that to be a good thing, and or do you see that there are some downsides to not having that degree?
I absolutely think we should not be requiring computer science degrees to work in the tech industry. There's many ways to get your education. And like I said, like if it was now, I'm not sure I'd go back and get that master's degree, right? Like I think there's a lot more ways I could have much more efficiently used those 2 years with like online classes and really targeting what I wanted to learn. If I had had the options that are available today back then, right? And so one of the reasons I think this is such an important topic actually goes to one of my side passions, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it's something around somewhere between 70 and 80% of the people who are Black who could end up getting software engineering jobs don't actually have like that 4-year CS degree. And so there's a huge number of people we're just not even allowing into the industry. And it's just because not having that piece of paper, even though they've gotten the training and learning from things like boot camps and other things, right? And so I think one of the big challenges is like there's this barrier to entry to getting into tech, and it's really these interviews, right? It's like what happens during this interview process and it's the big challenges, right? Like if the interviews are just asking things like algorithms questions, which yes, you do learn in a class, is that really going to make you an amazing software engineer? I don't know, right? And so one of the things that I really challenge people is, do you really have to have that CS degree? I was like, no, I did this for 5 years before I went back and got my master's. And hey, I ran the Java download infrastructure and it didn't go down. So somehow I managed to do that without having a CS degree. And so I really challenge people saying that you need a CS degree, and I think we're actually limiting people who could be amazing software engineers by having those.
You'd mentioned that during the interview process that they potentially ask questions about algorithms, and you're unsure whether that's even useful in determining whether they can be good software engineers or not, what would you, in your opinion, what kind of questions would be asked at an interview to determine or whether someone would be a good software engineer?
Again, I think interviews are really, really hard, but I think the way I try to do that is make it be more of a pair programming question where you're actually working on something that's related to what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. And so, on my web team, for example, one of the interview questions we have is we actually have like a little basic React JavaScript app that is just like the foundation. And then we say, hey, add this 1 or 2 features to it. And they do it as like a pair programming exercise, right? That's much closer to what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Like that's what we do all day pretty much, is create, JavaScript React components. And because you're doing it as a pair programming exercise, you can actually see, hey, how does this person interact with this other person? Are they collaborative? Do they take feedback well? The other aspect that I really like to look at when I'm looking at interviews is people's potential for growth and learning, right? Honestly, what has made me successful in this industry is my passion for learning and the fact that I've continued learning in the last 20 years. And so that's what I'm really looking for as well when I'm interviewing people is, do they have that passion and that drive to just find that solution, right? Find what is that next step that we can get to, right? And how do we keep finding it?
Interesting. I suspect the reason so many companies keep this requirement for a CS degree is so that they can pare down the number of resumes they have to go through so that they even get to the interview process. So even if as you mentioned, 70 to 80% of Black people that would potentially be eligible or could do the job but are being barred because of not having that degree, if you include them in that application pool, now you're going to have even more people that you would need to sift through, a bunch of resumes to sift through so you can get to the ones that you actually interview. What criteria do you think companies should use to pare down that number so that they can interview people?
And the thing is, at the end of the day, right, if you're working like at one of the big 5, right, like, yes, that is definitely a challenge you have. You're going to have hundreds of resumes coming your way. When I was working at Apple, it was actually pretty crazy. Like, we would have people who were completely not qualified, like applying to jobs just because they spanned every job at Apple. Like, I literally would have people who were like dishwashers at a restaurant applying to like software engineering jobs, which was kind of crazy. But but in most companies, like my company, right, I don't have I don't have a huge number of people applying to my jobs, right? I do have some people, right? But a lot of what I do and my team does is actually go out and source candidates, right? And find candidates who would be good fits for the company, right? And so I try to encourage our recruiting team to really explore outside of just LinkedIn and really look at other options. There's so many amazing communities out there to increase diversity in the tech industry right now. There's the Black Tech Pipeline, which is doing an amazing job in trying to get more Black and brown people into tech. Alpha is an amazing women in tech community, women who code. Like, I could list like 20 communities, right? And so, I really tell people it's about focusing on getting out there to the different communities and finding those diverse candidates, because here's the thing. Technology today is not fully addressing the needs of women or underrepresented minorities. Let's talk about voice assistants. It does not work as well if you have a female voice, or because of the higher pitch, or if you have an accent. Facial recognition software doesn't work as well if you have a darker skin tone. The underlying data that's being used by all of this machine learning has a lot of bias in it. And so to really be creating the technology we need to be solving the real problems of the future, not the convenience ones we've been solving so far, but like our real issues like climate change and the horrible inequality we have in the Bay Area around income and things like that. Like, how can we use technology to solve those problems? To do that, we need diverse teams to be building that technology, because you need those diverse mindsets to understand the challenges, like really truly be part of this, to find the solutions. We need those people to be finding the solutions with us, right? You need all of the different perspectives.
Okay, yeah, diversity. Yeah, I hear a lot about that these days. It's really important, and just like as you mentioned, bringing in people with different ideas to benefit the company. At what point do you think that the issue of diversity will be, I don't want to say resolved, but won't be as big of an issue as it currently is?
Oh, I wish I could say I think it's going to be solved in the short term, but unfortunately, I don't know that that's the case, right? We really need to, especially now, we're in the middle of what could be a diversity recession. 1 in 4 women are considering doing something that they would have never done pre-pandemic, which is actually leaving the job market. And we're not just talking about in tech, we're talking about overall, right? And if you talk about just mothers, that actually goes up to 1 in 3. And if we have that many women leave, not just tech, but like the job market entirely, that's going to be a huge impact on diversity. And so I think it's something that we really need to be focusing on, because if you look at the statistics, like we're not going to be solving this for another like 70 or 80 years if we keep at the current rate that we're going. So
Interesting. 1 in 4 women are considering leaving. Do you know why?
yes, it is because of the extra pressures of the pandemic, and especially a lot of the unspoken responsibilities women have at home around caretaking. They're still picking up a lot more of the work at home, unfortunately. And so, yeah, a lot of women are considering leaving the workforce. This was all part of a McKinsey does a wonderful women in the workplace study every year. And so this was their latest research.
Interesting. Is there anything that companies can do to convince these women to potentially not leave the workplace?
Yes, provide options for, flexible work hours. How can people do childcare now, right? What are one of the things we even started doing at Tile is like I think it's once every week or once every other week, our admin does like a couple hour like child class with the kids, like a tutoring thing for the young kids, right? So at least parents have a couple hours they could just have somebody take care of not take care of, but like entertain their kids so they can do maybe a couple things at home, right? I think it's the little things like providing a membership to something like care.com so you can get care resources, right? I think the benefits people need now are different than they needed pre-pandemic.
Oh, interesting. I mean, you mentioned, well, you'd mentioned that the work hours making them more flexible, but people are working from home. Is it because I don't work at a company, so I don't know. So maybe you do. So even though people are working from home, do they have to work set hours?
Some people do, or you have meetings, right? And so one of the things that we did is between 12 and 1, we have no meeting time so that people can actually have the time to prepare lunch for their kids, right? And so it's those little things that you might not think about. Like I don't have kids, I don't have to prepare lunch for them, but I know a number of my colleagues do, and that's what they spend their lunch hour doing, and they really appreciate that they know that there's not going to be a meeting scheduled there, and so they can take care of their family. And so I think it's about those little things to really figure out how you can help your employees thrive during these times.
Nice. When it comes to public speaking specifically, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
Oh, no, no, no. So yeah, I was terrified of public speaking, actually. And I did not think I was going to get into public speaking. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, is this something that you're going to go do later in your life? I would have been like, no, absolutely not. So this actually all comes back to 2018, when I left Apple. I actually thought I was going to leave the tech industry. I was pretty fed up with how things went in Apple, and I was fed up with how women in tech got treated, and I was pretty ready to leave. And so I was going to start my own small business, and I joined a small business mentorship program, and I met this lady who has a business which is about sharing your message with the world. And she became a close friend of mine. And I actually became her first customer, actually, for her company. And she helped me create my talk for Grace Hopper. Because I really realized when I was about to leave the tech industry that I couldn't leave, because if I did, I'd be giving up the ability to influence the future. And 56% of women leave tech after 10 to 20 years, and then 22% of those go and start their own small business. So I would have become a double statistic. And I realized I couldn't do that. And so I really wanted to come back to tech to be able to be on a mission to keep women and other underrepresented minorities in the tech industry with me. And I realized one of the best ways to do that was to become a better public speaker. And so I was not expecting actually to get accepted for that talk at Grace Hopper, because it's actually really hard to get a talk accepted at Grace Hopper. But, I went through the process, submitted it, and, got to share my story. And it really kind of started my, public speaking. I've done over 40 talks now in the last 18 months, either around, retaining women in tech, sharing my story, or, I do a tile tech overview as well on the tech side of things. And, it's really been great getting out there, sharing my message, meeting so many other people in the tech industry, and just getting to hear what they're up to. And, I actually really encourage people who are getting into tech to get into public speaking, even if you're not going to be, doing presentations in front of hundreds of people. Everything is public speaking when it comes down to it. When you're a leader and you're in a meeting room, it's public speaking, and so I tell people, try to do, LinkedIn videos or, Facebook lives or things like that as a way to practice, getting your voice out there. And, especially for people who are in the job market, that is a way to differentiate yourself, right? If you start recording content about what you're learning and share, insights and interesting knowledge, it's almost like you're doing an interview for somebody without having to do an interview. I know numerous people who have gotten jobs because they've gotten into public speaking and they've been able to share their knowledge on LinkedIn, and somebody was like, oh, wow, I definitely want that. And so I highly encourage people to either, create videos, write blog posts, just get yourself out there.
Nice. You've mentioned that you almost left tech just because of, well, not just, but because of the environment, and you didn't really like it so much, but you ended up staying. I've interviewed quite a number of female engineers. I'm always kind of curious for the ones that did leave engineering, why they left. And most of them, like you even mentioned, some of them started their own businesses, but they said that they were going to start those businesses regardless of the environment that they came from. I'd really be interested to learn more, if you do know, I guess the numbers of women that leave because of, I guess the reason you almost left, because of being disgruntled, as the ones that were going to leave anyway, because just they want to do something else.
It's pretty high. I think it was in the 60 or 70%. I don't know the exact percentage, but a lot the number one reason women leave tech is not because they want to start a family, and it's not because they want to do their own thing. It is actually the number one reason is actually because of the disgruntledness. And so it's a big challenge in the tech industry, and it's the small things, right? I call it death by 1,000 paper cuts, because I can't, yes, there were some bigger things that happened, but I can't point to one specific thing and say, that is the thing that triggered it. It's literally lots of little things. Here's some examples. When I worked at Apple, I was the engineering manager, and I had a male project manager who worked with me. Whenever we'd walk into meetings, the assumption was always that he was the engineering manager and I was the project manager. Like, to the point that actually somebody even emailed me an apology at one point for actually making that assumption, right? And so it's those little things, right? Like not being invited out to drinks when you hear, on Monday morning that all the guys went out to drinks over the weekend, right? It's being having your ideas appropriated in a meeting and having somebody else share that idea like 20 minutes later and be like, oh, it's great, but when you shared it, nobody spoke up. And it's those little things, and it's why we need to put so much emphasis in how do we make companies more inclusive, right? And that's the piece. So many diversity in some ways is the easier problem because it's a numbers game, right? Like you can say, oh, I need this many, people of, this race or this gender, whatever, right? It's a numbers thing, right? Inclusion is a lot harder, and so people don't focus on it as much. But if you don't have the inclusion, the diversity doesn't matter because those people are just going to leave, right? And so the big challenge in tech and in the job market in general, but definitely in tech, is how do we create inclusive environments where everybody can thrive and, remove this underlying bias that there is.
When it comes to the presentations that you do you ever get nervous before them? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
Oh, absolutely. I totally get nervous before public speaking. And so this goes back to something I definitely got taught, which is I do power poses. So this comes from Amy Cuddy's power poses. And so I'll literally do a power pose and tell myself, like, I'm amazing. I'm going to, do a great presentation and everyone's going to love what I have to say. And just really, pump myself up and really take the time to realize these people, they don't know my talk, right? They don't know word for word what I'm going to say. And if I mess up, the only person who's going to know that I messed up is myself, unless I show that I messed up. Right. And so that's what I tell people. Like, nobody has your speech in front of them, right? Nobody knows exactly what words you're going to say. And so realize that it's about sharing your message and your story. And it's about being vulnerable. People don't want to see perfection because guess what? We're not all perfect, right? And so people want to see that vulnerability. And the talks that are the most impactful are really the ones where somebody can share a discreet message, but also be vulnerable as well.
You offer some really great tips to get better at public speaking, Josie. I really like the ones about doing LinkedIn videos and Facebook Lives in order to practice. And then also the one about using power poses as a way to minimize nerves. Do you have any other tips that you can offer people to become more effective at public speaking?
Yeah, record yourself and watch yourself, which is really hard. Like, I still don't like hearing myself. And so one of the things that I always go back to is how you hear yourself is not how everybody else hears you. So you have to get over the fact that you might not like hearing yourself. And that is one of the hardest things sometimes to get over when you start watching your videos. But if you can get over that, there is so much you can learn by just recording, doing your talk, and watching. Are you saying ums and likes? What are those words that you say a lot that you might not notice? But then you watch your video and you're like, ah, that is something I need to keep a watch out for. And once you've graduated from recording yourself, give your talk to your pets, right? Like, start with your pets, right? I know sometimes it can feel scary giving it to a person. So I tell people, like, my dogs have heard all of my talks many times. They don't complain. And so, your dogs and cats aren't going to complain to you. So start with them and just realize people don't need you to be perfect. They just want to hear your message.
Yes, and you're messing up if your dogs start walking away when you're practicing in front of them. It's like, hey, get back here! I ain't done. This has been really great talking to you, Jossie. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Jossie Haines, and you can also email me at josie@starbug, starbug.org.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. Consider checking out Teach the Geek to Speak. It's an online public speaking course. You can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Jossie.
Thanks. Bye.